Hey y'all, Gilberto from Snowflake here. I'm very excited to show you today how you can use Snowflake as a backend to power your Django application. Django is a very popular framework for building web apps using Python. And all of these web apps typically serve OLTP workloads or workloads with a lot of transactions and a lot of concurrency. Snowflake can be a great backend when you need Snowflake's data cloud to power your app. So in this video, I'll demonstrate how you can set up your Django app to use Snowflake as a backend. Let's get started. I'm going to be following the steps that are in the Django Quickstart, which you can find on quickstart.snowflake.com. Once you navigate there, type in Django and open up the Getting Started with Snowflake as a backend for Django Quickstart. So if at any point you need to stop and refer to a step, open up this Quickstart, find the step, and use the content there to help you get back on track. All right, let's go and get started. So you're going to need a few things to be able to walk through this tutorial. One, make sure that you have a version of Python of at least 3.8 or greater. You're going to need a Snowflake account, which I encourage you to create if you haven't already done so. You're also going to need a code editor, a terminal, and Git. So let's start by navigating to github.com/Snowflake Labs. This is our open source organization on GitHub where we have a ton of cool demos, template code, and open source tools that you can use as you continue to build on Snowflake. If you scroll down to the repository section, type in Django, this repo, SF Guide Getting Started Django Snowflake, click on that. This repo is a starter repo that contains a Django project, and within that project, there's a Django app. That is the app that will eventually connect to Snowflake as we hook up Snowflake and Django together. So let's start by cloning this repo to our local development environment. So click here on code, copy this. Now I'm going to switch over to VS Code and run git clone. Great, so I've now cloned that repo to my local environment. I'm going to navigate to that repo. All right, great. So now let's make sure that we can get the app in here up and running. So the first thing we're going to do is install Django, and we can install Django by running pip install Django. So as you can see, my terminal says requirement already satisfied because I've already installed it. The next thing we'll do is we'll start the app so we can see if it's running successfully with Django. So let's take a look at the files in here. Navigate to the Quickstart folder. In this folder, you see a file called manage.py. Manage.py exposes a lot of really cool functionality that you can use as you work with the Django app. And so we're going to be using it in concert with a couple of other commands so that we can play around with the app and get the app running. So to use manage.py, you'll type python manage.py, and in this case, we'll add the command called run server. Great, so as you can see, the terminal outputs a message here. You can ignore this warning that says, you have unapplied migrations for now. We'll address it in a later step. But as you can see here, a development server has been started at localhost 8000. So let's go back to our browser and navigate to localhost 8000. And we get a 404 page not found error. And this is completely intentional. This is because we don't have a view defined at the root of the app. However, we do have a view defined at /trips. So let's go ahead and add /trips at the end of localhost :8000 and navigate there. And if you're successful and you have Django installed successfully and the app is running correctly, you'll see this message, hello there, welcome to the Django Snowflake Quickstart. The next thing that we'll want to do is create a database within Snowflake. So as you can see here, I've already logged into my Snowflake account. I'm going to click on data, then databases. I'm going to click create a database. I'm going to create a database called Django_DB. I'll hit create. As we can see, Snowflake will proceed to create the database. And this is the database that we will eventually connect to the app that we have running locally on your machine. So now let's navigate over to VS Code, and we can start installing the Django Snowflake connector. But actually, before I install the connector, I want to check the version of Django that I currently have running. So I'll type in python-m Django -version, and I can see I have version 4.2 of Django. And the reason that I want to check the version of Django is because I want to make sure that I install the corresponding version of the Django Snowflake connector. So I will go ahead and type in pip install Django Snowflake equals 4.2. And we run into an error. And this error is actually expected because as you can see here, there are a couple of different versions of 4.2. One's an alpha and one's a beta for the Django Snowflake connector. I'm going to install the latest version, so that'll be this beta. So when I go back and I install Django Snowflake, I'm going to specify 4.2b1. Great, so as you can see, requirement already satisfied, successfully installed. Django Snowflake, I already had this installed on my machine. With the connector installed, we can now begin connecting the application to Snowflake. So go back to VS Code and start by expanding the repo folder. Within that, you'll see a folder called Quickstart. Open that up. Then you'll see two more folders, one for Quickstart and one for trips. Open up the Quickstart folder, and inside you'll notice a file called settings.py. This file contains a bunch of configuration for the Django app, including the configuration for databases. So feel free to peruse it if you're interested in checking out all the types of configurations that you can do. What we're going to do is modify the code on around line 77. So this databases dictionary. This databases dictionary is a collection of named databases that are configured for your Django project. And by default, Django projects are configured to use SQLite as a backend, which you can note here. Engine SQLite, name db.sqlite3. And we're going to modify this entry to instead use Snowflake rather than SQLite. And so we'll first start by modifying engine. Instead of this, we will use the Django Snowflake engine. Name should point to the database. And so we've already created a database within Snowflake. So let's go ahead and enter that name here, Django_DB. And then we have to specify a handful of other options here to be able to connect successfully to Snowflake. First, you need to specify the schema. You can use public, since that comes with the Django DB database that we created earlier. You need to specify a warehouse. Your account should also come out of the box with a warehouse called compute_wh. We can use that. And then you'll need to enter your username, password, and account identifier so that the app can successfully connect to Snowflake. So first, we'll start by entering username. So for me, Hernandez, password, and finally, account. So here you're going to enter your account identifier. And if you're having a hard time figuring out what that is, just go back to your Snowflake account. And at the bottom left, you can expand this drop-down menu and find your account identifier. So this is the account that I want to connect. And so if I hover over this, I'll see this menu. And here I can copy the account identifier. So I'm going to click on copy account identifier. I'm going to go back. I'm going to paste this in. You'll see that by default, it includes a dot or a period between the two components of your account identifier. Switch that out for a dash instead. And there is also an optional options field that you could pass in case you are interested in passing in any other connection parameters. So I'm going to save this file, and that's it. I don't need to do anything else, but I do need to confirm that this was successful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the app, and if I was unsuccessful in connecting Snowflake and this app, I'll see an error message. But if I was successful, I should be fine and I won't see any errors. So let's go ahead and Python manage.py run server. Don't worry about these warnings, but as you can see, system check identified no issues, 0 silence. Again, ignore this warning about unapplied migrations. We're going to address them pretty soon. But that's it. You don't have to do anything else. You've now connected this Django app to Snowflake. and you're ready to proceed and keep building. So now let's run the Django migrations. Let's actually get rid of this pesky warning that we keep seeing. I'm going to open up another instance of my terminal. Okay, there I am. And the reason we're getting these warnings is because for your Django app to function properly, the app requires these Django-specific tables to be written to the database that we created. And so without these tables, your app could behave in unexpected ways, and we don't want that. So let's go ahead and run the migrations to be able to write these tables back to the Django DB database in your Snowflake account. So we can run the migrations by, again, invoking manage.py, and in this case, we're going to run the migrate command. So let's go ahead and hit enter here. As you can see here, now it's saying running migrations, and there are several migrations that are going to be run. And so these are all tables that are going to be created in your Snowflake account within the Django_DB database. And you can actually go back and expand here the tables and see the tables that are being created in real time. And so these are all the tables that the pesky warning about migrations was warning about and saying, hey, I really need these tables so that the app can function properly. Let's go back. Great, so we see no errors here. All of the migrations have been run. So the app and Snowflake are now connected, but we don't have any fun data within our database that we can programmatically use throughout the Django app. Sure, we have the Django-specific tables that we wrote earlier, but I think we can add some data that is a little more fun than that. And so that's what we'll do in this step. We're going to load some data into the database. So to start off, let's go back to the Snowflake account and navigate to your Django_DB database. Click on the public schema, and in the top right, click on Create, Stage, Amazon S3. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be loading data that is in a publicly accessible S3 bucket into Snowflake, and then we'll use that data in our app. So let's start by creating the stage. You can remove the code that is in this modal, and what I'm doing now is I'm going to copy the first bit of code from step 8 in the Quickstart that I mentioned earlier. So I'm pasting this in here. This is creating a stage called citybike_trips. Let's create the stage. And as you can see, it was successfully created here. So the next thing that we'll do is define a target table and a file format to use for the data ingestion from S3 into Snowflake. And so what we want to do here is navigate to worksheets and create a new SQL worksheet. I'm going to be copying and pasting code from the step 8 of the Quickstart into the worksheet here. So this code is going to create a table called trip with all these columns defined along with their data types, and also define a file format with a bunch of options that will be used as the data is ingested from S3 and into Snowflake. So let's go ahead and run all of this code. You can see the file format CSV was successfully created. And the last thing that we'll do, actually before we copy the data, is just confirm that this was successful within our database. So let's go back to our database, Django DB, public tables, and let's hit refresh. You can see there is now a trip table there. Let's go back to worksheets. And I'm going to copy the last bit of code, again from step 8 that I'm seeing in the Quickstart. Copy into trip. So this is going to take all of the data in the S3 bucket and copy into the trip table that we defined earlier using the CSV file format and all the options that we defined. So let's go ahead and run this command. And just give it a little bit of time to execute. Okay, so as you can see, I think all of the files quite a handful of files from the S3 bucket were successfully loaded. A lot of rows. Let's go back to the database, DjangoDB, and check out the trip table now and see what kind of data is inside of it. So we already know that we've defined these columns. Let's go to data preview, and here's a sampling. So we have almost 62 million rows in here. This is a sample. This is 100 of the rows that we can preview. So you can see all the data has successfully made it into this table. Great, so now that we have some fun data in the database, let's create our Django models so that we can use this data throughout the app. So the app and Snowflake are now connected, and our DjangoDB database within Snowflake has some fun city bike trip data that we can now configure to use throughout the Django app. So let's go ahead and do that. To be able to use this data throughout the app, we'll need to create models so that we can programmatically access the data and use it throughout our views in Django. And so we could do this directly from the terminal with a handy command that Django provides called inspectdb. So let's go ahead and type in Python manage.py inspectdb. And what this command is going to do is it's going to look at a table within the database that's been configured in our settings.py file. And so that table is trip. And it's going to look at the table, generate some models, and dump them into a file. And so let's define that file. We'll call it generatedmodels.py, and we'll run this. So it's connecting to Snowflake. It's looking at the data in the table. And if we're successful, let's actually expand this here. You'll see a file called generatedmodel.py, and if everything went according to plan inside, you will see auto-generated models. So let's go ahead and take a look. And yep, there they are. And one thing to keep in mind is, although the inspectdb is very handy, it is not perfect. It is going to make a best guess at when auto-generating the models. And so you should always revise these generated models just to make sure that they are what you expect. This is why we put them in this generated model.py file. And now that we've revised them and they look correct, we can use them actually in the models for the trips app. So in the right here, let's expand trips. Go to the models.py file. We can replace everything in here with the auto-generated models. Let's run our server. As you can see, we get an error saying, hey, trips.trip can't have more than one auto-generated field. And that's because we need to specify a primary key, and let's use the trip ID column as a primary key. So instead of null equals true, we'll say primary key equals true. Let's save that. Let's restart our server. And great. Now that we have a primary key, we're not seeing any issues. As you can see from this message, we're good to go. All right, since we've created a model, we'll also need to create a migration. This migration is going to record the creation of the model. So let's go back to the terminal and run Python manage.py make migrations. We want to make migrations for the trips app, which is represented by this folder here. Let's go ahead and hit enter. This is going to create a migrations folder within trips, so you can see it here, and populate it with a file here with the initial migration. And so now that we've created the migration, we have not yet run it. We'll need to run it. And so as you can see, create model trip. If you're really curious, you can open this file up and just check out what's in the migration. Do not modify this file, but if you're curious, you can see exactly how the migration is being recorded. So now let's go ahead and actually run this migration. So we'll do Python manage.py migrate trips. It's going to run the migrations for the trips app. All right, so it applied all the migrations, and we are good to go. Let's do a couple things now. Now that we have our model set up and configured to use throughout the Django app, let's imagine we're an end user of the app, and let's go ahead and browse the data. So let's go back to the browser. We're still at localhost 8000/trips. But we actually pre-configured this repo to have a view that would display some of the data in our Snowflake database. And so if you type in /from gram-consalia, bam, you should see a sample of the data within our Snowflake database. And so if you're interested in seeing exactly how we configured this, I would check out the Quickstart. There's some more information there on how the views are configured. But again, this is just a sample of the data. There are all sorts of cool things that you could do with this data if you really wanted to. But I just wanted to demonstrate how easy it is to hook up your Django application to use Snowflake. There's one more really neat thing that I'd like to show you that Django can do for you out of the box. Now, this is an optional step. You don't have to follow along if you don't want to, but I just think it's so cool that I really want to share it with you. So out of the box, if you're an admin of the Django app, you can browse the models within an admin UI that Django provides. And these models are based off of the data that's actually in Snowflake. And so I think that's pretty neat. To view this data, you'll need to register as a super user of the app and then also register your model to the admin site. So let's go ahead and do that now. Let's go back to VS Code. I'm going to run the following command: python manage.py, create super user. It's going to prompt you to define a username, an email address, and a password for your super user. You can have it be whatever you want. So mine's going to be Hernandez1. I don't want to input an email address. I'm just going to hit enter. And then it's going to ask me for a password. So I'm going to go ahead and use a password here. It's too common. Again, this is just as an example, so we can bypass this validation and create this user. Great, so my super user was created successfully. Let's go back to our browser and access the admin UI. So we'll go to localhost 8000/admin. So you should see the login page for the Django admin UI, and we can log in with the super user that we just created. So I'm logging in, great, and so I'm in. And you can see a couple of the tables that are already defined as part of this Django app. I don't see an entry here for our trip model, so let's go ahead and do that. If we want to be able to access that data through the admin UI, we need to register this model. And so let's go back to VS Code, and within this trips folder, locate the admin.py file, and we're going to add 2 lines of code. First, from .models, import the trip model that we defined earlier. And then on the admin site, we want to register this trip model. Let's save our changes. Great. Don't see any issues down here from the terminal. Let's go back and refresh. And there you go. We now have an entry for the trip model, and if we click on it, you can actually browse every single row that is within Snowflake from this handy Django admin UI. And so each trip object here represents a row in that table in our Snowflake database. So you can click on it, and if you really wanted to, you could modify the data here, any of these fields. You could save it, you could sync it back up to Snowflake and keep and do your database administration this way. But this is just a really handy interface that Django provides to you out of the box. It might not be the best interface for you if you want to edit data. It all depends on your use case. I really wanted to share it with you just to show you that it's possible to browse that Snowflake data from within Django, but you should choose a workflow that best suits what you're trying to do and your use case. But I thought that I should show this to you because it's very neat. And there you have it. In just a few short minutes, you were able to set up a Django app to use Snowflake as its backend. And what we covered here today is just a demonstration of what's possible. There are all sorts of cool and neat things that you can build whenever you're using Snowflake to power your app. If you're interested in learning more, I would recommend that you check out a few of our resources. Check out our community at community.snowflake.com. For more quick starts, check out quickstarts.snowflake.com. And for more videos that show you how to use Snowflake in cool and different ways, check out our YouTube developer channel, Snowflake Developers. Hopefully, I'll see you there. And thanks so much for watching this video. Have fun building.